we're gonna kick off, and today's really just to hear about your story, Brittany, and we've been really impressed since we've invested in you and Jade and the wider team, and would love to kind of rewind the clock and hear about what you two were doing before you set up QFlow, and I'd love to hear about the inspiration of why you decided to set it up, and we can go from there.
Sure. So before QFlow, both Jade and I worked in construction and engineering. So I was a civil engineer. I started my career with Mott MacDonald, but actually ended up working for Lang & Rourke in Hong Kong, which was quite an experience. If you've ever been in construction outside the UK, it's very different, very challenging environment. Mm-hmm. And then came back to the UK to work for Bureau Happold Engineering, and it's there that I ended up bumping into Jade. So Jade was working as an environmental advisor on Crossrail for Skanska, and then later on HS2. And in 2016, we both completely serendipitously volunteered to work for a charity called World Merit, which ended up with us both being in New York, working to tackle the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So for anyone who doesn't know, there are 17 sort of global objectives that we need to hit so that we can have a more sustainable and prosperous future. Mm-hmm. So we both chose to work on goal 6, clean water and sanitation. So we were these very young, enthusiastic, bumbling Brits in New York going, woo, we're going to try and make the world a better place. And, we worked on this project for 2 weeks with people from all over the world trying to tackle clean water and sanitation. And it was amazing. And we really sort of bonded. We got on really well, I think in part because, we're both British and we had that sort of mutual connection, but also we both came from the construction industry. And we were deeply aware of how construction is just it's such an amazing industry. It literally builds the world around us. It creates ease and opportunity for so many people, but it's so unsustainable. It's so wasteful. It's a bit of a mess, really. So on coming back from that trip and actually founding an NGO out of the back of it, we stayed very close. We continued to work together, but we both became increasingly frustrated with our industry. And so in 2018, we decided to take a slightly different approach. We didn't feel like not-for-profit was the way that we wanted to go in terms of having an impact on the world, and we decided to work on profit with a purpose. Mm-hmm. And that's really where QFlow came from. We decided to tackle construction to try and make it more sustainable and do that in a way that we knew that we could grow the company fast and have a massive impact at scale across the world, and actually really present opportunity to construction projects no matter where they are, whether that's London skyscrapers all the way down to rural Africa.
Amazing. I mean that's a great story and super inspirational how you guys came together and started with a purpose. I'd love, and the audience today, by the way, is are other founders that are earlier in the journey than you are, and I'm hoping that by hearing your story that there's a lot of lessons in there for them as well. But before we go into some of those specific lessons, perhaps you can shed some light on the specific problem that you're solving. Like, obviously you had this wider vision overall of profit with purpose, but you needed to start somewhere and get specific. So maybe talk to us about the specific problem and go into what you've built that's addressing that.
So Jade and I hashed through a couple of ideas on how we thought we could help make construction more sustainable. And at the time, she was experiencing a very specific and acute problem on Crossrail, which was being able to track and manage the environmental impact of this mega project. The current process for that was very manual. It required a lot of chasing of the supply chain and trying to collate lots of information across different bodies and then audit it and then try and make sense of it. So we felt that one of the parts of this was going to be helping the industry to manage data and actually use that to inform their impact. But really, when we started out, we had a very, very broad remit of make construction more sustainable. It was only really when we went and took Jade's initial hypothesis around, this is a pain point for the industry, actually tracking and managing its impact, and went and spoke to over 100 different engineering professionals and said, is this a problem for you? What do your problems look like? Is it something completely different? And we heard all kinds of things from the industry, but one core message that came back from almost everyone we spoke to was, it is a nightmare trying to capture this data on site. The variety of data formats that they get are huge and the quality is very poor. And then just the time and effort it takes to pull it all together and actually make sense of it was too great, and so it wasn't happening. So it became very clear to Jade and I that if we were going to help the industry improve its impact, firstly, it had to understand what its impact was, and the quality of the data they had was too poor to enable them to do that. But it also had to be really easy for them to do, because there are so many other things that are mission critical during construction that getting good quality data to manage their sustainability just wasn't high up on their priority list enough for them to actually take the time to do it properly. So we had to make that step really easy, so that getting the value from that data was suddenly a much more valuable task for them to do. And so that's the pain point that Jade and I focused on, and it's what we've solved with QFlow.
Amazing. And I love how you went about, spoke to the industry, and you were already in the industry, so you had an initial hunch as to what was wrong, but you needed to have these detailed conversations to really define the problem and then help that shape the product you built. There's obviously a lot of talk within construction and real estate about the importance of the environment, sustainability, ESG, and it seems that post-pandemic, firms are finally starting to put their money where their mouth is and starting to make those investments. Maybe touch on how it was in the early days in terms of early traction and how that may be changing now. Is that because you're more mature? Is the macro environment and the impetus to invest changing?
I would certainly say it's a bit of both. We certainly are more mature, and so having those conversations is easier, and we're in a position of great authority in that respect. So people are coming to us for the answers. But I would put 90% of that down to the market changing. So when we started in 2019, sustainability really was at the bottom of the food chain. It was a tick box for most people, and some people didn't even have it on the list. There were a few pioneers who had really positioned themselves as sustainable companies, and so we went for them first. And our first client, Canary Wharf Contractors, had just a very, very clear mandate around responsibly sourced timber. So we weren't trying to solve their entire sustainability problem. We weren't trying to track all their concrete and all their waste at the time. We just focused on timber, but it was a big enough pain point for them because they'd made a commitment. So that was really where we started in 2019, was very focused and only really going for the leaders. Where we are now, particularly after, the first half of 2020, we just saw this huge shift. Carbon suddenly became the word of the industry. And at Digital Construction Week a few weeks ago, every single stage, regardless of whether it was the sustainability stage or the productivity stage, was talking about carbon. And there were companies from big legacy providers, tech providers, all the way down to startups who had all somehow miraculously pivoted their focus to include carbon somehow. Obviously, we started there, and for us, it is amazing to see so many companies move their focus to really push the decarbonisation agenda and to really start thinking about the impact of the industry. On the flip side of that, or even more to the positive for us, is that they're now coming to us to integrate and to draw that data in, because one thing that the industry has suddenly realised was that, okay, we need to do carbon. There's all this legislation coming in, there's all this funding coming in, our clients, our investors, our insurers are forcing this on us, we need to do something. But we don't know what it is we need to do. And so they're sort of coming to people and go, do you do carbon? And you're like, what do you mean by that? It's just this sort of awakening or this sort of rebirth within the industry saying, okay, we really need to get a grip, which is fantastic for us, but is also just such a huge shift from where we were in 2019 that I don't think Jade and I ever anticipated the pace of change that we have seen and the opportunity that that's presented to us.
Yeah, no, sounds like a super exciting opportunity, and it seems like the timing is just perfect. And as the world recognizes the importance of reduction of carbon and starts to prioritize it and finally puts that into real budgets to be spent on real projects, and there's capital out there to spend on products like QFlow, what changes have you made within the company to get ready for scale?
So there's two big changes that we've made really recently. The first one is, up until now, we've done very founder-led sales, and we've very much focused on building the technology, making the technology robust and scalable. And I think that is a really important thing, particularly for the construction industry, who, if you break their trust, if you don't maintain that level of quality and support, then they won't trust you again.
Yeah.
It's a very relationship-based industry, so it was really important for us to make sure that that tech was always delivering, and that if, you know, when it inevitably does fall down, that we were there to hold their hand and make sure it was back up and running straight away. So we very much focused on that, which meant that we didn't grow sales, we didn't focus on sales, because, you know, it was happening very organically and it was growing quite happily on its own just through founder-led sales. We've now invested in building out our commercial team, and that is something we're continuing to do. And I think that one of the big things that we really are doing now is doubling down on, you know, working with the leaders still in the UK, but also starting to look at that international space, because this isn't just a UK-based movement. Yeah. We're seeing pull. I mean, the recent Australian elections have clearly shown the move from one of the global laggards in sustainability Australia really was, is now possibly going to be one of the global pioneers, and it's just it's going to be such a shift. So that's one of the big things we've done to try and make sure that we can capitalise on that. I think the other thing is we constantly are taking stock of where we're at. So we don't just do an assessment of the business every time we fundraise, which I think is quite an easy thing to try and want to do, and then just like head down and work on it. I'm constantly trying to remind myself to take a step back and go, okay, what's changed in the market? What does that mean for us? Not just in terms of potential competition or sort of legislation and, you know, global recessions that we keep seeing, but actually what are the opportunities that are coming up off the back of some of these shifts, and also those global dynamics. And then also feeding that back across the team and hearing what they're seeing as well. Yeah. So trying not to just look at the macro from my perspective, but also making sure that those individual conversations we're having with clients are always being fed back across engineering, across customer support, across sales, to make sure that that full picture is being seen by everyone, so that the opportunities are being pulled out. I would not say we've done it perfectly, but we're still working on it.
Just jump in there. Super interesting. Is the team that you're building also changing, or the type of people that you're bringing in as you now start to scale within enterprise clients? Is there a certain type of persona that they want to see on the QFlow side, or that you need to have on your side in order to win big contracts? That's a really good question.
So we have actually just hired a very senior sales lead, which is in part to take some of the pressure off me, so that I can focus on other things, because at the moment I'm so in the weeds every day that it's getting very difficult to keep doing that step back piece. So that's one thing that we've done, and I wouldn't say it was client-led necessarily, it was more to give me a bit of space, because it was getting unsustainable from that perspective. I think one thing that we've done very deliberately within the commercial team, the very client-facing side, is hired people from within the industry and not tried to take tech super salespeople, like SaaS salespeople, and help them learn construction. We've taken construction people and taught them sales. And we tried both really early on. We very quickly found which would work better. And having spoken to other founders and people in this space, we definitely think that's the best way to go with this industry in particular.
Okay, no, super interesting. You mentioned the international piece, and you know, we often say at Pi Labs that particularly when it comes to startups that are addressing sustainability challenges, Europe appears to be ahead of, for example, North America and other parts of the world. A lot of the innovation and thinking and legislation is coming out of Europe. And the other thing we're seeing is that a lot of UK and European startups, because our local markets are quite small, like we don't have a large homogenous market the way the US does, a lot of the startups that are born here tend to be thinking global quite early on. Do you have like any examples of how you've come out of the UK and now have clients or client interest from other parts of the world?
So we haven't deployed outside of the UK yet. We have had quite a lot of interest from a few different markets, which is one of our challenges, is identifying which one do we want to pursue first and how, so that we don't spread ourselves too thin. So there's definitely been interest from Central Europe, so the Netherlands and France. There has been interest from the US and then also Australia. And there's sort of pros and cons to all of those. So Australia, from a construction perspective, is quite a laggard in terms of tech adoption. It's about 7 years behind the UK, most people think. So there's actually a benefit for us there, because our system, it works so well with an underdeveloped digital supply chain. And it's actually really been designed to help that digital transition, so you don't need to be tech enabled. That actually works in our favour with Australia. We can help them sort of take that leap, and the fact that they're not very tech savvy doesn't really matter. On the flip side, it's on the other side of the world, so it's slightly tricky. Then with Europe, you're totally right. Their sustainability, particularly in the Netherlands, their sustainability mandate is so much stronger. But then we had the language and the cultural barriers, and then that is actually, again, more significant from an operational perspective. So a big piece that I'm doing at the moment is assessing which challenge do I want to take on, and what's the best way to do that, and also what funding do we need to do that effectively.
Right. Sounds like you're going international one way or the other. It's just
finding
the path.
Matter of time, matter of the right client, and right strategy.
Yeah. There's often been like a critique of sustainability startups, climate tech startups, that while there's a great purpose that we all believe in, that often doesn't translate into growth. Like it's hard to find, at least from a VC's perspective, a startup that's demonstrating like hockey stick growth, but is also doing great things for the environment. Do you think that's going to change? Do you think that the time we're just at that juxtaposition, we're at that juncture where things are about to change now?
Yes, I definitely think things are changing, and that there is definitely more potential for that hockey stick growth, as you said, from these companies. I think regardless of whether a company is doing good or just trying to raise or just build, a massive company, they have to be adding value to their customers some way or another. And sometimes just adding sustainability value, just focusing on that carbon is enough. And that, I think, is more likely to be enough now. But when we started out, that definitely wasn't enough. And so what we're starting to see, or at least I'm optimistic that we'll sort of carry on, is actually seeing more and more businesses and companies that are building something that is valuable independently. So it's saving time, it's saving money, it's reducing risk, and it's delivering that sustainability outcome.
So there's a commercial benefit to the customer in addition to the sustainability benefit.
Yeah, so I think with QFlow, the way that we position this with our customers is always that it's going to affect your bottom line, it's going to save you time and money, it's going to reduce your risk, and that's always the pretense on which it's bought. The sustainability is the added benefit that means that they definitely want to work with us, as opposed to some other system that might save them a bit of time and money, but it's not going to give them that transparency and that accountability across their supply chain to drive net zero.
Sure. Interesting. And just a related question, then I'd like to move on to some kind of take a different tact and talk a little bit about the culture that you're building in the organization. But before we get on there, I know with founders and with VCs, there's life is kind of has a bunch of milestones, right? There's you, in the early days, you're a pre-seed company and nobody expects revenue out of you, and then you become a seed company and people want to see some commercialization, and then eventually there's that big milestone of the Series A, and I know that's kind of your next major milestone. For the listeners here that are going to go through this journey, what do you think are kind of like the key? What's going to help them get there
to Series A?
Yeah, and maybe you can speak to your personal experience with running QFlow as well. Like, what do you think it's going to take?
Yeah, I think the one thing I've learned consistently through all the fundraisers is that you can't judge one company by another company's metrics. So when we came out of Entrepreneur First and we were raising our first seed round, we were watching some of our peers raise 5 million seed rounds with 0 customers, 0 product, 0 revenue, just an idea. And we were like, what the hell is going on here? Yeah. Because we were sat there struggling to raise a seed round at first with a paying customer and a clear idea. And the reality was we were being treated differently as companies, which is fine. That's how VCs work. And as a founder, you just have to accept that. So I think it's really hard to say that there's, a certain set of milestones that you have to hit. If you hit 1 million ARR, that doesn't mean you're going to raise a Series A. Or, if you get 20 customers, it doesn't mean that the VC is going to think you've got product market fit. So I think one thing that I've learned, possibly the hard way, but have definitely got my head around now, is that it's about finding the right metrics for you as a company that truly shows your consistent growth and your potential, but also that is the right metrics for the VCs you're targeting. And one thing we did very wrong the first time round is we tried talking to SaaS investors in our first seed round terrible idea, total waste of time. We should have focused just on prop tech investors, which we did. Obviously, Pi Labs backed us, and that was fantastic. And then in our second round, we focused on prop tech and impact tech, because that had grown as a market, which it didn't really exist first time we went out for funding. And we didn't even bother talking to the SaaS investors, because the metrics that we produce don't look like your standard SaaS metrics. And if you show them the way that we work with project-based sales instead of individual user-based sales, it just freaks them out, and they can't get their head around that sort of what looks like churn to them, which isn't really churn. And so focusing your efforts and knowing what the right narrative is for you, but also for the people you're talking to, and pairing that up effectively is important. Yeah,
that's great advice. And I guess the good news for you and other startups out there that are focused on climate and sustainability is that there's a lot more capital in VC markets going there. So look forward to some milestones to come in due course. Just switching gear. Love to hear about culture. It's very topical. It's a very competitive labor market. I'm sure with hiring right now how difficult it is to get people in and to retain people as well. Love to hear about what type of culture you're building. What are some of the key values that you promote within the organization, and how that's going to contribute to your success.
It's a really good question, because it's something that Jade and I obsess over, and in a good way, I think. But we're constantly trying to nail down, because everyone asks you and everyone says culture's so important and your team is everything, and 100% agree. But then you're like, how do I create that culture, and how do you sort of encourage that throughout the team? And I think the answer that we've come down to is that you don't do it by doing anything specifically, you do it by doing everything consistently, which is a very weird thing to say, and it's not an easy fix. If you have bad culture, you've got a problem. I think luckily, or very deliberately, Jade and I were able to develop a really positive culture really early on, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that we were able to build that team in person and not remote, because I think that really helped. So we spent our first year with the team sort of in person in the office, and built this beautiful, very transparent, very friendly, quite relaxed culture. We don't run, like Jade and I look at Elon Musk and Tesla and go, no thank you, that is not our culture. We don't want that kind of work life. And you hear stories about the competitive hungry startup where people are there until 2 a.m. and they're living off pizza, and they have this what sounds like this amazing sort of cult-like environment, which to me just sounds like hell. It sounds like people are possibly stuck in quite a toxic environment and burning themselves out very quickly. And burnout is a real challenge. So we didn't want to foster that kind of relationship, and that might be what some startups love, and it attracts a certain type of person. And so you will get talent that suits that culture. That's not the culture we have. We have a much more collaborative, much more open, sort of transparent relationship with our team, and we try really hard we do have hierarchy, we have management, you need to when you're 25 people, but even within that hierarchy there isn't the sort of, I'm not going to use the phrase, I was going to say willy wanging, but that's not really what I want to say. There isn't that sort of leveraging of the hierarchy to put people down. It's very much used to hold people up and support people, and that's something that we've worked hard to keep. We have looked at ways of sort of reinforcing it, like SaaS tools that, list your values and that kind of thing. But ultimately what we found is that we ran a workshop with the team saying, what do you think our values are? Like, you tell us what you think the company looks like. How would you define those? And we actually spent a session defining those values. They're on the website. And then every time we have an all hands, we say, these are our values. Are we still living up to them? Do you still think this is relevant? Can you give some examples of how we've done that as a team? And so the one piece of software that does slightly help with that is we have a kudos system where you can give a member of the team, anyone across the company, a kudos associated with one of the values. And so it's sort of reinforcing it gently. But that's not how we created culture. It's just how we celebrate it. Those are tools
to kind of maintain it.
Or just even just celebrate what we have. I think it's maintained by the way that people behave, and it has to come through the way that you behave as a founder. And if you ever undermine it, you're in a bad sticky position, and you would have to call it out straight away and say, look, this was me not being collaborative, and I'm sorry about that, and this is how I'm going to make sure that, you know, moving forward I am behaving in a collaborative way in line with our values.
That's super interesting. And it seems like as you're now a team of 25, what you're doing now works for you. It'd be really interesting to see as you become 50 people, 100 people, 200 people, which, you know, hopefully you will, how the way you instill, manage, maintain, celebrate culture changes.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen a massive shift just since we've gone from 12 to 25.
Yeah.
And people always say this, every time you double it, it changes again.
Yeah.
So
you need to keep iterating.
Yeah, and we have seen that, and we've, you know, not deliberately lost people on the way, but we've lost team members on the way because as a company we've outgrown them, or they've outgrown us and they've gone in different directions.
Yeah, that happens.
When we did our last round, one of our investors goes, God, you've had really high staff turnover. Like, what's going on? Have you got a terrible culture? And I was like, whoa, okay, I hadn't even thought that we had high staff turnover. Yeah. And when I went through the list of like 4 people that had left, so it was not a high percentage. Yeah. But okay, so with our generation, people moving on is not that surprising. We have a young, we have a very good spread of ages, but we do have like an overall a young team.
Yeah.
But also every person that left, there was a really, really good reason. So one, we knew they were always going to leave when we hired them because they wanted to go and start their own business. They were joining us to learn. And so the fact that they left was amazing. And we're still, I mean, Jade's on holiday with him at the moment. So it's that sort of like, they're so much part of the family. Another guy that left is because our product had grown to a point where we didn't need his skill set anymore.
Yeah.
And so we tried to pivot him internally into a new role, but he didn't really like it. And so he decided to move on.
In a way, you can think of leavers, you can spin that in a positive way and think about them as alumni.
Yes,
they're your alumni.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're brand ambassadors of yours wherever they end up.
And they still offer us support. Like if we've got a specific question about this type of marketing, then Callum's like, yeah, sure, let me answer that question. And it becomes a sort of even broader community. So I think, like you said, it's the way you think about leavers and the way you think about the growth of your company. It's absolutely fine for people to leave the company, and in many ways it shows that you're growing, but also your team are growing and that they are learning things and taking them elsewhere, and that's totally fine. We live in a very different culture now, where the way that we relate to work. When I started at Lang & Rourke, all the people I worked with at Lang & Rourke Construction had been there for 25 plus years, and they were like, yeah, we're there forever. And I was like, God, that's awful. How are you learning and growing? And we have a different way of thinking about it in our generation.
I mean, we could spend an entire session talking about retention and what it means at the senior levels and what it means at the more entry level levels and stuff, but we won't go there because there's quite a bit to unpack just there. But just on that topic, we all went through the pandemic, and that changed the way we all work. There's a lot of statements that are being made nowadays publicly. You mentioned Elon Musk, and you know I read some of his notice to his employees, which is a really interesting approach. I can get that. It's a physical environment. Factory workers need to be building products in person. It's very different. But how do you think the pandemic is going to change long term the way QFlow works? Are you guys going to remain hybrid? Have you thought about this past the next 6 to 9 to 12 months? Is it going to be all in person? Do you have a view on this?
Yeah, so our current plan is to remain hybrid. And that's, for us, what it means is that firstly, the team that we have can live in the places they love. So I don't live in London. I live in Devon, and I'm a total country bumpkin, and I love working in London, so I'm here most weeks. But the fact that I can work from home a few days a week means that I can really make the most of being down there, being around my family and that kind of thing. And so we've got team members now in Bangor, in Wales, in Glasgow, in Scotland, and it's allowed us to recruit from a much wider talent pool, but also allowed us to support the kind of work-life balance that people want across the team. So for us, hybrid really works. We do still have in-person days, so we have our quarterly all hands where we get absolutely everyone together. The commercial team and the engineering team get together every other week as a team, and so we managed to maintain and support that in-person collaboration and cultural development without mandating the sort of enforced being in the office. It always has benefits from an overheads perspective as well, where we can maintain a smaller office and a nicer office as a result.
Yeah. I guess one of the key challenges maybe retention right? When everyone's distributed, how do you maintain the culture, make sure everyone feels included, make sure everyone's engaged? I know as CEO of a VC firm myself and speaking to CEOs all the time of our portfolio companies, it's not an easy challenge, but clearly we're all still trying to figure it out, it seems.
Yeah, I do not have any answers on that. I know it is a challenge for us as well, and we try and make the best of it. I think again it's about finding that balance. So the benefit of being able to have people remote means we can attract better people, and it is something that, my brother-in-law's job hunting at the moment, and he's like, I specifically am looking for a job that allows me to work flexibly and work remote. And so I think more people on the market are sort of in themselves mandating that flexibility.
Sure. It also allows you to tap into a wider employee pool, right?
Yeah.
You can have, there are firms that have employees in Africa or Asia or North America,
exactly.
just
it's just finding the balance and walking the line.
So moving on from here, senior talent. So we're sticking with the theme of like human capital, and moving on from culture to human capital. This business started off with you and Jade, and clearly it can't just be the two of you and the senior leadership team to build this to the scale that you're aspiring to. Do you have any tips for our founder audience on how to attract senior people onto the team to work alongside the founders to build the business to the next level?
I certainly wouldn't say that we're pros at this, and we don't have a huge amount of experience in it, in terms of we've done it 3 times now. So we have a CTO who's amazing, and interestingly, he actually started working with us back in 2018. He didn't join as an employee, he joined as an advisor and was an advisor for 3 years, and then joined us as our CTO in 2020. And I think for those really senior hires, building those relationships early really helps. It helps you understand if you can work with them, whether they've got the right cultural fit, and really whether they stick with you if they believe in what you're doing. So that's one tip, that if you can do it, great. It's not always feasible. For both our head of operations and our VP of growth, the thing that made us confident that they were going to be a good fit for the team was really their motivational alignment with what we were doing. So did they get why we were building QFlow and why it was so important to us to see the industry change? And were they really bought into that? And I think they're, obviously you can do that in a functional way by giving them options. And I think getting them bought into the company through an option scheme is incredibly useful, and highly recommend doing it. But also doing that on an emotional level and really understanding where they're at in their lives. Is this their final big gig and their exit opportunity and their gateway to retirement, or is this the thing that's going to make their name and create that opportunity for them to be C-suite in their next role? And really sort of unpicking where they're at emotionally and sort of in their life cycle can help you understand if it's a good fit for what you're trying to achieve as well. And I think just being, we talk a lot about honesty and QFlow and transparency, but I think it really helps being honest and transparent with these roles, because if you make the wrong hire, it's painful for you. If they join you and it's not right for them, it's incredibly painful for them as well.
It's also disruptive for your whole team.
Exactly. So it's worth getting out early and just saying, like, look, this is the type of thing we're looking for. Really honestly, is that you? If it's not, then that's no harm, no foul, but it's probably best not to shake that up.
I'd agree. The why question's super important. We're going to wrap up in about 2 minutes. One of the questions I'd like to get out before we do is, it's really stressful being CEO, right? You can lose sleep. You kind of bear the burden of all of the company's problems across all of your team members. How do you cope? Like, is there anything that you're doing that's helping you with just general mental health and wellness so you can stay just grounded?
Yes. So the first couple of years, I found this really hard, and Jade and I burnt out a lot, like regularly, and it was just painful. We've both agreed now that we protect our weekends on like a religious level. So Saturdays, there is no work, and no emails, no one talks. It's important. Then Sundays, I use my evenings as preparation time, and I find that
Same as me.
I find it very relaxing, because it means that I know when I start on Monday, I'm not going to be like,
Yeah,
it means
yeah.
that I know I can kick off. But actually, I know so many startup founders who just work 7 days a week, and if you can do it and not burn out, great. I cannot. Yeah. And just being really honest and upfront with myself and saying, protect your weekends, go for a run, go for a hike, go for a swim in the river, whatever it is you need to do, but don't work on those days and don't look at your laptop. Yeah. So that's the one thing that I've done. Yeah. During the week, I work all kinds of hours, and I love it. I love working late. I love getting up at 5 and doing that, and I do really enjoy that, but not on the weekends.
Completely agree with your approach. I'm the same. Except for the Sunday evenings.
Yeah. I like my Sunday evening email clear out.
Yeah. Final question, and we'll wrap up. Just taking a step back and taking a helicopter view again. So you built QFlow a couple of years ago. I think it was 2019, at least when we invested. I think you set up the business the year before. We're now in 2022. So looking out 5 years out onto the horizon, where do you see the business in 5 years? So
first thing is definitely international. It's something I'm really enjoying exploring at the moment. And one of our sort of key missions on that is really nailing down the impact piece. So Jade is working a lot on the product side to really make sure that we can capture the impact it's having on the industry. And so having a clear way of quantifying and sharing that. On the other side, around the team and around where we're at in terms of ownership, I think in 5 years' time, we'll probably be starting to think about exit opportunities, whether that's being acquired by one of the big existing players, or possibly even looking at an IPO. We're not sort of...
I like that ambition.
Yeah. We're not, to be honest, we're not in a rush to exit.
Yeah.
Jade and I both agree we don't really want to be running a 2,000 person company like that. We love the early scary startup bit.
Yeah.
Actually, I think there are people better placed to run 2,000 person companies.
Yeah.
But for us, QFlow is about having a global impact on the construction industry. So if the best way to do that is to be acquired by someone like Procore or Autodesk or Oracle, then we will take that route if we think they're the right partners for it. If the best way to do that is for us to go acquiring people and to IPO, then we'll definitely go do that. But it's about making sure that we have that global impact and that construction becomes the ethical and sustainable industry that it can be if it just has the right support.
Amazing. Well, I hope that you defy the trend of European companies being acquired by the larger American company, and perhaps
we'll beat Procore.
You yourself can emerge as the global champion. I lied earlier. That wasn't my last question. I have a last one. I'm a firm believer in what's known as the virtuous cycle of entrepreneurship, and what that is you've learned a lot along the way as an entrepreneur, and there's a lot of lessons in your mind and learnings. And we create these podcasts for the next generation of entrepreneurs who are going to, the Brittany's and Jades of tomorrow. So what final nugget of wisdom do you have to share for them?
God, there's so many. I think if you've not started the journey yet, don't be afraid to give it a go. I think so many, because Jade and I, we have huge student debts. We don't come from a background of lots of money, and we're trying to do this in our evenings and weekends. And so when we said to our families, we're thinking of quitting our nice stable jobs in construction to go and do this startup thing that we know nothing about, they were all like, are you sure? And we weren't sure either, but we were young enough and stupid enough to do it, and I'm so glad we did, and I would do it again every single time. And I think my dad used to say, feel the fear and do it anyway, one of those like motivational lines. So I think the one nugget is feel the fear and do it anyway.
Great. I like that. And on that note, we're going to wrap up. And we hope the entrepreneurs or the future entrepreneurs have learned something out of today's session. Thank you.
Thanks, Faisal.